It had been a month since that horrible night. A month since he had stalked her and killed all her friends. A month since he had vanished into the night. She had no one now. Her friends were gone, and all her happy memories of them were ruined by the image of their bodies burned into Laurie's mind. Her parents avoided the subject of Halloween and told her to move on. Even Dr. Loomis was gone, practically run out of town by Mr. Brackett and the townspeople who blamed him for his escape. Laurie arrived home from school that day to something lying on her front porch. It was a picture torn from a newspaper of her, Annie, and Linda. There were red X's drawn over Annie and Linda's eyes. Her hands trembled. Just another prank, she told herself. Just some boy playing a cruel trick on me. Her skin burned with the sensation of being watched. One day, 2 months after Halloween, Laurie had walked home from school with Ben Tramer. Ben had been trying to connect with her for months now, but she had politely refused all his invitations out at the weekends. The idea of a date with him brought the memories of that night flooding back. In fact, Laurie hadn't been out much at all since Halloween, and every time she had been, she was sure she caught glimpses of him in the corner of her eye. But this long period of isolation had left Laurie desperate for connection. On that day, she had finally accepted his offer of going to see a movie at the local theater at the weekend. When she and Ben had parted, she was sure she had seen him watching them from across the street. She blinked, and there was no one there. They found Ben's body that night. It wasn't a clean kill, not like her friends on Halloween. He had been savaged until he had become almost unrecognizable. Laurie couldn't stomach reading the full description of his body. Not when she knew it was her fault that he was dead. Days and weeks blended together. It was spring now, and Laurie had been left alone in the house. Her mother and father were out celebrating the newfound success of Strode Realty, but she had no desire to join them. Going out and having fun seemed completely alien to Laurie now. At 10 o'clock that night, the phone rang. Laurie hesitated in answering, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Her father had told her that he would call from the restaurant, but something felt very wrong. She told herself that she was just paranoid, like her mother and father said. She went to the phone and picked up the receiver. The first thing she heard when she held the receiver to her ear was a noise that sounded like faint whimpering. Then nothing. She told herself it was just the background noise of the restaurant, but dread brewed in her stomach. "Hello?" Laurie said, voice quivering slightly. There was no response. A sharp scream suddenly shattered the silence on the other end, and then silence again. Another prank call, Laurie desperately told herself. Just some jerk trying to scare me. But then she heard that deep, distorted breathing. unmistakable. She couldn't pretend that it wasn't him anymore. The line went dead. Laurie dropped the phone and ran. Dick Baxter was found in the morning, strangled by a phone cord and stuffed into a closet. He had asked her to the spring fling outside school that previous day. That wasn't enough to save him. Laurie ran through long, twisting corridors. The bodies of her friends and family and classmates hung from the ceiling. She could hear him coming for her. She ran and ran and ran, but the halls were never ending, and he was never far behind. The dead eyes of the bodies burned into her as she ran past. She felt herself grow tired, but forced herself to keep going. She turned onto a hall with a dead end. He was right behind her. "It's just a bad dream. It's just a bad dream," she told herself. She willed herself to wake up. She reached the end of the hall and collapsed onto the floor. He advanced on her, arm holding his knife raised. There was no use begging for her life. If anything, he seemed to relish it. The sound of floorboards creaking interrupted her dream. Laurie jolted awake. A wave of goosebumps rose on her skin. The feeling of being watched prickled on her skin. The sound of deep, steady breathing filled her ears. It was him. He was in her room. She heard him walk towards her bed, slowly. She felt the burn of those horrible eyes on her back. He was in her room. He was in her room. He was in her room. She forced herself to go still, pretending to be asleep. Alone and defenseless in her room, she had no other choice. He seemed to enjoy her fear on Halloween. He might not attack her if she gave him no reaction. There was complete silence for a moment. Not even the sound of his breathing cut through the air. It felt like hours before she heard him move again. Closer this time. Laurie opened her eyes slightly, facing the wall. The moonlight filtering in from her window cast his shadow over her. He was lurched over her. There was a slight sound of fabric brushing. She saw his shadow lean forward. She felt his hand touching her hair, rubbing a strand between his fingers. She heard his breathing now, deep and heavy. She remained still, half from keeping up the pretense of sleep, and half due to sheer terror. His other hand moved and reached to touch the back of her neck. At this, Laurie could not stifle her gasp. His hands drew back at once. There was a terrible stillness in the air. The rapid pace of Laurie's heart reverberated in her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut again, willing it to be another nightmare. After what seemed like hours of complete silence, Laurie opened her eyes again. There was no shadow cast on the wall. There was no sound of labored breathing. There was no feeling of being watched. She turned to face the rest of her room. He wasn't there anymore. Perhaps he never was. She drifted back asleep. She awoke in the morning to goosebumps on her skin, not from fear, but from cold. Behind her curtains, her window was open. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't a dream. It didn't take her long to discover what he had left for her. Among the books and notes on Laurie's desk, a new piece of paper was hidden. It was easily looked over, but Laurie's paranoia had made her far more observant recently. With shaking hands, she picked up the paper. It was a drawing, childish and colorful. Her name was written in messy handwriting at the top, with a red love heart drawn around it. A girl with yellow scribbled hair and a green shirt and cardigan was smiling and singing in the street. She was walking past a run-down house. He had drawn himself on the front porch, a black figure except for his white mask, with 2 black circles for eyes. Her breathing hitched, and a chill went down her spine. A wave of terrible realization came over her. He had heard her sing that song in the street. Her song had drawn him from his home, and after her. I wish I had you all alone, just the 2 of us. I would hold you close to me, so close to me. Was that what had caused all of this? Had his twisted interpretation of the song been what had drawn him to her? Was this what had caused him to kill her friends? She felt the now familiar burn of his eyes on her. She dropped the paper and ran from the room. The shape watched her discover his gift. He watched as she held up the paper and watched as she fled the room. She had not reacted well to his gifts to her that night either. She had only screamed and cried and ran from him. Next time, she would not get away. Not like on Halloween. The shape was sure of it. Next time, the shape would win.